We are discussing about layoffs, or the topic for this week, hiring practice. So we have discussions to go through. So we're talking about breach of implied contract. So said that she asks one person in your team to explain employment at will and the exceptions. Who like to
For implied
volunteer to do that?
contract,
Yes.
for the implied contract, it means that usually there's some sort of you have some sort of oral or written agreement that it doesn't have to necessarily be one of those two, but both parties understand that they will be doing a certain project or work together for like a certain amount of time. And for a breach for that to occur, there has to be lack of warnings saying that they're doing, a poor job. There has to, if they're receiving raises or bonuses or a promotion and have basically no idea that firing is in the cards for them. And also, it can be harder to prove breach of contract the longer that somebody has worked for the company. So let's see. Yeah, and when they receive assurances that the employee was doing a good job.
Okay. What about the exceptions?
The exceptions for it,
Yes.
well, those would be when it's broken. So if you have documented proof that they have been warned that they're not fulfilling the job requirements that they've been asked to do, when they do not receive promotions, maybe your company has certain times that they need to be going up the line for work and they are not meeting those expectations, then that can be grounds for being fired. And basically just when they're being told, when they've been given the warnings, you need to work on this, you need to work on that, and you don't see any progress.
Okay.
Are you
Thank you very
referring
much.
are you referring to the exceptions from the employment at will doctrine? Is that what
Yeah.
you're talking about?
Yes.
So,
That's what we're talking about.
okay. So on page 2 of that document, it says that exceptions fall into 3 categories generally. Breach of an implied contract, breach of an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and a violation of a public policy.
Okay. So those are the exceptions for the employment at will. The breach of implied contract says this is a contract between the employer and the employee that is created by the actions of the employer. So the employer could imply that employee will have continued employment by making statements about how well the employee is doing. The employer could also create an implied contact through an employment manual that details termination practices. For example, a three strikes policy that says they have to give you notice before firing. So this has to do with the actions of the employer and the employee. And as Sarah explained, it sometimes has to be either written or not written, but there's that action or response from one end on both sides. One does something, the other responds in affirmative, and they just take it like that. By the breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing will have to come into play when an employer unfairly tries to avoid doing what they agreed to do under the contract by terminating an employee. So terminating an employee for refusing to commit an unlawful act, serving on jury duty, blowing the whistle, filing for workers' scam, refusing to date someone's boss, etc. So these are policies that the employer can't fire an employee for in either of these cases. Then comes the discrimination status. This one too applies to the employer as well. The title V covers race, national origin, gender, and religion, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Now, all of these are means that protect the employee against unlawful termination or forceful termination or something based on the breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Did I miss any part, or you like to make some input?
I think you covered it.
So the step 2 says, what should the manager do? And this have to ask us to respond to each of these questions. We'll talk about Terry first, then the same question about Phil. What impact does Terry have on the company's bottom line?
I would say Terry's impact is negative. He's not contributing at all. So I think they should go ahead and give him the 2.5 and put him on the PIP.
I agree. I think he's not doing his job, and he's actually taking away from the productivity of others trying to get his job done, and he's not helping the team at all, really.
I agree, because he's taking time away from the manager, asking questions, basically asking the manager to do his job when the manager could be just managing the regular issues of the company. So he's not really an asset at all.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's an asset. I believe he has good intentions, but I think he was brought on more as like a favor. He didn't really meet the qualifications to get the job to begin with. So.
So yeah, I think so too. He was really not an asset, and you could tell that was not going well with the company at all. Because they expected him to perform very well, and nothing is forthcoming from him. But what obligations does the manager have to the company based on that information?
I think
Like according to according
The
to the
manager needs to
manager.
do what's best for the
Mhm.
company. I mean, he's not pulling his weight at all, and so it's hard for him, the manager, because he's stuck with the situation where Terry's friends with the CEO and the VPs, but he shouldn't even have got hired. He got no hire straight across the board, like from 5 people, and usually it says that after 2 or 3 they get sent home. So, I think the best thing, I mean, it's going to bring morale down for the rest of the employees who know he's not doing his job.
Especially when you're working in a team like that, I feel like it's important that you have to have everybody that's, on the same playing field. If you're just, doing a job that it's by yourself, it's just repetitive, whatever, it's not that big of a deal, and he's not doing that great of a job, it's not going to affect the other people as much. But when you're working in a team and there's people that are not doing their part, then it's really going to bring the other people down, and they're going to feel like they need to pull these 2 people along. And so I feel like it's the manager's job to keep that team working together and keep the morale up so that they can get their job done and do a good job.
Yeah, that's right. The manager knew Terry wasn't really performing, and his salary or his involvement in the company is actually a cost to the company because they're not getting anything for him. So if he must get a whole team along, he just have to do something about Terry. Either he give him a lesser responsibility in which he feels he could be more effective, or he just have to send him off. Time is being wasted and resources are just being thrown away like that.
I agree, and I think that it's important to let him go as well because as the other team members see that he's getting away with a lack of performance, then it's going to affect their performance levels as well. They're not going to want to put in a hard day's work if this other guy doesn't and he still is around.
Mhm.
And Terry even knows that he's not doing the job. He gives himself the lower score than the passing score that most of them are looking for. So he knows himself that he's not helping as much as he should be.
The danger with such kind of situation is that when other members of the team knows that Terry is not performing and the manager knows about it and is refusing to take action, it kills their morale. Their speed of action. They will not want to. They too feel lazy or lackadaisical about being. They'll say, "Oh, after all, Terry is this, and the manager is not doing anything. So why shouldn't I do the same?" So
Well,
the
and
manager. Mhm.
I think the manager wants to do something, but the manager's in a hard situation because he's got the CEO and the vice presidents who aren't seeing what he's seeing, and they think that he's making a great contribution.
Okay.
Well, it's
So
almost
based
like
on.
they don't want to do anything. Like the VPs know he's not doing it, but they want to keep him on because of whatever with the scuba diving thing happened. Because they're like, well, can't you just give him a 3? So I think they almost can see it. They just don't want to admit to it.
Yeah. So based on what we have learned about employment at will and exceptions, what legal obligations could the manager have to Terry?
Well, I think that they need to discuss. Well, actually, I think the manager is doing a great job. She's trying to get him involved and find ways that he can be helpful. So I think that that's a good thing. She's trying to find a place for him, but it's just not working out. So I think discussing with him how, you're not really contributing to this team and being open with him, not beating around the bush, but, being straightforward with him and telling him exactly, you're not contributing. You're here every day and you just aren't doing the job because you're not qualified for it. I think that's the best way to approach it.
I think under the breach of implied contract, there was several things that they could, like a court could restrict an employer on the termination listed on page 2. So length of past employment could be a problem because he's been employed for so long. It says the longer the better for the employee. It also says lack of past warnings. And I think that's going to be the problem, is that no one else has really warned him. All the rest of the managers have just kind of dealt with him. So I think that's where they're going to run into a problem on this breach of implied contract, is that there's a lack of past warnings. I don't think that the raises, bonuses, or promotions received is an issue, because it doesn't sound like he's really gotten any of those. And I'm not sure under the assurance that employment would continue based on doing a good job. Like, I don't know what promises were made, but it sounds like if 5 people, if they hired him based on 5 no hires, somebody must have promised him something. So they could run into some problems with breach of implied contract if they're not careful under the assurance of employment or the lack of past warnings.
I agree. I think the next step needs to be doing the PIP program that they have set up in the company, and start making the documentation to show that he's not able to do the job. And then that way they have a stronger case.
But if he got hired the way he did, obviously pulling a few strings, that really the manager can't, his hands are tied unless he can get the CEO and the people above him on board. I mean, he could go through the company policies and protocols just like they did for hiring him, and yet it might in the end not even make a difference if the CEO's like, oh, well, he's my friend and he's staying.
Exactly. As Cindy was explaining earlier, the possibility of the implied contract and the discrimination thing to come on against the company. So they'll want to look into those issues carefully before taking any serious decision on Terry. But what about ethical obligations? What ethical obligation does the manager have to Terry? To the company, to other employees, to himself?
I think that, Terry was hired to do a job that he wasn't qualified for. So I think they do have obligations to him, because they put him in this position when they hired him. The manager, because she took on this situation, also, took on that obligation that she needs to try to train him or direct him in the right way that he should go. Because I think they took on the responsibility as soon as they hired him, even though he had no hires across the way.
I think it seems like in one of the other videos that Brother Stanley had posted, he was talking about when there's issues that arise such as this, that you should turn it back to the employee and ask them, maybe it would be good for the manager to just approach Terry and say, hey, how's this working for you? Do you feel comfortable in your position? Do you feel like you're productive? Or perhaps is there another position that you would feel better suited for that would help you reach your personal goals and help you feel like you're performing to your best ability? Maybe just kind of turn it back to him and see what he personally feels like he could do to be a better employee and a better person in the position he's in.
I like that. I like giving the employee back accountability instead of just letting him slide along. Kind of that where the 1 week where they were supposed to send them out to, that day of paid leave to go decide what it is that they want to do and what their goals are for the company. Something along those lines where it's kind of back in his court to, maybe even point out like the strengths of some other people and some weaknesses, and then be like, hey, how can we work on this? How can we solve this? What should we do?
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely a good idea, because they can start doing this and try to help him to, to do better at his job and have performance reviews. And if he's not able to meet these, qualifications that they're setting to, help him improve, then in a couple months they'd be able to look at it again. And if he's not meeting what he needs to do, then they're going to be able to have, a better reason to let him go. And they'll actually be able to have things that they can look at that the managers set forth that he isn't meeting. So they'll be able to, it's still hard with him being a friend and everything, but if he's not doing his job, then you can't just leave him there.
Well, and I think that if you put it back on him, maybe he doesn't realize kind of what a liability is. So if it's pointed out to him, most people don't want to be that liability. So they will either try to find a better situation for themselves or leave if that is what's better for them.
I agree with that too. I think there are a lot of times when people know that they're not doing well and they're kind of frustrated with that. They don't feel like they can make the changes. When you give them the opportunity to make choices, I think it makes them feel a little more empowered. And maybe he's not happy in that job. He knows he's not doing a good job, it says down there. So maybe if you can explore other options with him or even other positions in the company, he might be happier and a more productive employee.
Yeah, that's really a great suggestion. It would have been very helpful as well if from the beginning the manager offered to give him constructive feedback on his performance that have helped him really improve. So to his other employees as well as to himself, what ethical obligations? Well, we've talked about that. Well, now let's look at Phil. Phil is also another person in this net. What impact does Phil have on the company's bottom line?
I think Phil is kind of in a unique situation since he was acquired from a different company. I think he's really trying to meet the expectations of the department, but because that wasn't what he was originally hired for with the company that they acquired, he's having a harder time coming up to speed. And now he has all these medical issues on top of it. So I think he's a little harder case because you can't he has these medical issues, and the benefits that cover these medical issues are through your company, and you can't leave him high and dry. So I think this one's a little harder one to think about.
Along with that, I think going over to his house and doing his garden and going to the hospital and stuff, it's great to show that you're a team that way, but it also kind of sends a false message to him. He knows, well, not he, but you know that he's not doing as well as he should be. You already have pressure to be firing him. And so to be kind of giving him that mixed message, that could really come back to bite you later if you do end up firing him.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that where it says when they very first start talking about Phil on page 6, he says that maybe they could shuffle things around and take support responsibilities from other people because they say they almost need him. Like, that's kind of harsh. Like, we almost need you on the team, but not quite. But it seems like since there's that possibility, there is that possibility of trying to find ways. I mean, and then later the manager's talking and he says that he really has some hope for him and that he wasn't completely hopeless. But again, the manager's in another hard spot because the people above her do not like him. So they basically want him out. I mean, when he said he wanted to fire Terry, the boss asked if Terry was worse than Phil. And so it's like he's got a target on his back anyway. So the manager really would have to step in and kind of see if they could help create more of a need for him.
And it seems like much of the issues that they're having with Phil stem from just personality conflict. And, maybe that's something they could address and try to fix or do some training or counseling, or I don't know. But when there's not that dynamics, when they're not getting along with the rest of the dynamics of the team, that's huge in a company.
The position of Terry is really zero. But when you compare him to Phil, when you compare him to Terry, he's less of a liability than Terry financially. You know, I would say that all the salaries and benefits being given to Terry is a cost to the company. The company doesn't even make that much. But Phil is someone you can say he's an asset that is contributing the best it could. But at the long run, he too is facing some challenges as well. Now, based on what we have learned about employment at will and exceptions, what legal obligations could a manager have to fill?
Well, again, talking to him, going to the hospital, putting all of the vacation time to supplement his disability time and things like that. I think you run into the problem of, what is it? Of making it look like a breach of contract. So you have to worry about that. You're going to have to step back and look at the time. How long has he been there? You're going to have to look and see, he really hasn't had a whole lot of past warnings, it sounds like, but he's not doing a great job, and you are getting a lot of pressure to fire him. So I don't know. You also need to look at from the company standpoint. Oh, that's right. He had been there for 6 years, but he hadn't been promoted. So he has a lot of time with the company, which is going to make it harder for you to do what your bosses want. And like I said, the fact that you were working so much to make it, you were giving him that mixed message, but he hasn't been promoted. So you have that. I'm sure that your uppers are going to be pushing that and saying, look, he hasn't been promoted yet. You've got to fire him. He's, he was the one that was doing the emails too that everybody hated, right? Isn't that one of the reasons why he was disliked? I think. But anyway, so you do have those.
I was just along the lines of that he hadn't been promoted. Was that, I can't find it in the reading, but they had mentioned that other people who hadn't been promoted had gotten fired. So I would be curious as to how they were able to fire them. Is it in the contract with the employees saying if you don't get promoted after such and such time, you'll be fired? Did anybody remember reading about that?
On page 7, it said also Phil had been with the company for 6 years, and it had a policy that if you don't get promoted after 3 years, you get fired.
Okay.
So he'd been there 3 years longer, and then it says he told me and others that he really expected a promotion. So he was expecting a promotion. So something in there is implying that he thinks that he should get one. But you have this issue that he's been on disability because he went on to disability. So that adds in the whole Disabilities Act into his situation, where like you don't have that with Terry as much. You know, you can't
So maybe-
violate that.
You know, there must be some kind of miscommunication between him and his supervisor. Maybe they're not doing the yearly reviews or something, so they're not on the same page, that the supervisor thinks he's not doing a good job and he's like, oh, I'm going to get a promotion. There's some kind of disconnect there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we have like this, you know, it talks about this other supervisor, that the other manager that didn't get the job. Then this lady got the job. You kind of wonder what was like slipping through the cracks with the other manager.
Right.
Because, right, to go 6 years when you should have gone 3, and then this new manager takes over and is like, wait, you're kind of a problem. I mean, you can see why the other one didn't get the job.
Right.
But you're wondering what documentation is missing.
Yeah.
Well, and you wonder that with Terry too, because she knew that he wasn't performing well, gave him tasks where he didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. And, you know, there's no documentation the whole time so that she was working with him either.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned the other manager, because he, Phil, or Terry, the first guy, he was getting the right number for his reviews when they were under that other manager. So was that other manager just doing what everybody else wanted? Didn't promote the other guy because upper management didn't like him? So it's really kind of weird why things are where they're at, you know. Is Phil not getting promoted because he's not liked? Maybe he should have got a promotion, but he didn't get one because of the personality conflicts.
Yeah, Rachel really didn't do us any favors.
And I think the thing that makes this so hard is that because of the time he has spent in the company, I find it so hard to send him off. And if they do, instead of 3, he has spent 6 years. If they do, he might bring some disability charges against the company, that may want to start claiming damages and all that. So making it more complex for them as well. So let's discuss the ethical obligations. What ethical obligations does the manager have to feel to the company, to other employees, to herself? You know, I like the thought that was shared earlier on about Terry getting his appraisal or so, and Phil. It would have been very much helpful if Phil also gets that kind of appraisal, but by implied way, he feels he should get promoted. And meanwhile, his managers or those at the top don't seem satisfied with his performance somehow.
I think it's unethical to keep a person in a job. I think it's unethical to the other employees to keep a person on a job that is underperforming and that can't do the job and that isn't improving or taking steps to improve. I think it's very unfair to the people that are pulling that person's weight. And I feel like Terry and Phil are those people. They're not improving. They're not doing their job to the standard that the rest of the team is. And so I feel like it's very unethical to the other employees in those groups, in those teams. And just because, you know, people like them or because they've been there for a while, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's good for the rest of the team members or the company.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex, because it sounds like this is a pretty high performing team. Yeah. And if they see that I mean, they're getting paid just like the rest of them, but they're not doing the job. It could really bring the morale down on that team. And so it's unethical to the other employees, and it's also unethical to them. I mean, they've got this false sense of security through this job that they're really not doing.
I also think it's unethical to give in to the pressure that you're getting from your bosses, your higher ups, about who to fire or who to keep on. It really needs to be based on how you think the members of your team are performing, and not based on personality conflicts or the fact that, you know, we all go scuba diving together. It needs to be based on job performance.
I think it's
The
interesting.
situation of Phil, when I consider that of Terry and Phil, it's more like what I would say, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I think
Yes,
it's
Cindy.
interesting also that it says the manager on the very first page, like it says, but program managers didn't have formal authority over anyone. So, like, even the manager isn't really sure how much authority she has, but she's just basically giving her review. And then it goes, like, where it talks about how the reviews go all the way up before it comes back down to the person. Like, it's really hard on this manager, but she's trying to do what's ethical to herself. She's trying to be true to how she feels, right? Like, she feels like there's hope for Phil, and so she's trying to act on that. And so ethically, she needs to act on what she believes and what she sees. But I agree with Alex. It is unethical to keep someone who isn't trying to improve. But I think obviously this manager can see that there's hope for him. So I think that it's like what we recommended for Terry, where we kind of turn it back to Phil and be like, okay, you've been sick, but you're back. And this is what's, you've been on disability, but this is where it's at. This is where the team's progressed while you've been away. What can you do to help our team improve? What can you do? What are your goals? How can I help you reach those goals? Like, kind of the same kind of process that we discussed with Terry. I think Phil deserves kind of that same try.
Thank you so much for the thoughts. We'll look at the step 3, analysis of company's HR practice. How well is the company in the case doing with its HR practices generally? We want to look at how do they hire, how do they manage people and give them feedback. Do employees get a clear picture from the company of how they are performing? What is the PIP for? Do you agree with the way the company uses PIPs? Do you think this manager can make a good decisions about these two individuals, or does she seem to be influenced by bias that will be hard to overcome? What are your thoughts?
Well, one thing that stuck out to me is it stated that this company was kind of built on on Microsoft's beliefs, but they don't really quite understand why, like, Microsoft had the PIP. They don't understand the backing behind that stuff. So I think they need to look at all of their HR stuff, and they need to decide what the point of the PIP is. They need to be consistent in their hiring practices. I mean, Microsoft's model, and Microsoft's a very successful company, so obviously they're doing something right, but they have their own belief behind why they did that. And so I think this company needs to make those decisions for themselves. And if they keep those practices, they need to know why they keep those practices.
Well, and I would say the HR department is not overly effective. I mean, when you have somebody who went through 5 different interviews and got no hires from all of them, but still got hired, and then you have someone who's been there for 6 years that was supposed to be promoted after 3 or be fired, clearly they need to look at all of their HR systems and, like, figure out how to resolve some problems. And I agree. I don't think that you should take something from your former employer and just decide, well, this is what they did, so we're going to try it, and not understand why that matters and how it would work. I agree with this manager. I think if the point of a PIP is to basically get you fired, they're just trying to get documentation. Like they're right, like at that point they've decided, hey, let's document something. Let's put you on this PIP. Now we've documented it, but there's no steps before that. I used to work for a company that did data entry from home, and they were kind of that way. Like you had to make a minimum wage on your piece rate, and if you didn't, they had to subsidize you. But after 3 times of subsidizing you, they could let you go. And the piece rate was so I had been transferred. So I started out with like American Express credit cards that got transferred to Mexico. Then I did something else that got transferred offshore. And so then I was doing Regents Blue Cross health claims. And the piece rate on those health claims was so low. I would literally work 8 hours a day and still not make minimum wage. And they were like, so they subsidized my pay like a couple of times. And then my manager called me and she's like, what you have to do is just say that you worked 4 hours. Don't say that you worked 8, say that you worked 4, and then you'll make minimum. And I'm like, I'm not going to lie. It took me 8 hours. Your piece rate is too low. Like, you guys need to understand. I've been doing this for, almost 6 years. This piece rate's too low. And she just was like, nope, you need to change the way you're reporting. And I was like, you know what, you can just let me go. And she wanted to put me like on an improvement plan, but part of the improvement plan was basically why. So it was set up for me to fail. I mean, if that's your plan, and that's how this PIP is, it's set up for people to fail. Like, it's basically, here's the documentation, now you're gone. And so I think that it's not effective and they need to find some other, system. And I think, like, going back to previous weeks where they had those, turn it over to the employees, and that employee accountability would be way more productive than we're going to put you on a pretend improvement plan.
I agree. I think it's okay to model some things after other companies that you see working, but you need to understand why they're working. And if they don't work for your company, you need to change them, no matter how well they work for somebody else. You've got to do what works for your company. I think the PIP needs to be changed. It sounds like upper management has way too much power over hiring and firing, and not enough power is in HR and who are over those direct people. They need to be given a little more responsibility over their people because they're the ones who are working with them. They're the ones who are in charge of making sure that production stays where it needs to be. And if you don't give them that authority, that responsibility, you're going to have a lot of issues.
And they are the ones that can give the best assessment because they directly manage these people. And so if you don't give them that authority to give that feedback both to the employee and the management, and then you stay far off to take decision, it's like making the person appear useless in that capacity. Hello, Alex, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so said to ask each person in the group to commit to a decision about what the manager should do with respect to Phil. So I'm going to start with you. What would you commit as a decision about what the manager should do with respect to Phil?
I think they need to let him go, just because of the thing with the promotion. he's been at that company, and he hasn't improved throughout the time that he's been there, and he hasn't been worthy of that promotion. And so I think maybe like we talked about with Terry, give him time or give him some goals that he needs to reach or meet. And if he isn't able to do those and help the team improve, then he needs to be let go.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
I think that he needs to be put on a plan like we talked about with Terry, but not call it this PIP, whatever it is. I think that we need to turn it back on him, ask him what he can do, what he's willing to contribute. Just kind of like, hey, it's a fresh start. You're back off disability, and now you've got this chance to, get going again. And this is where the team's at now. This is where we've progressed while you've been on disability. So what can you do to contribute? And again, maybe look at that situation where the manager had said maybe she could take some stuff from other people to create a full need. Like they felt like they almost had a need for him. So I think she needs to see if she can create that need, because I think that there's a lot implied in his contract with the going and helping him and all the effort and stuff that they put into helping him through his disability. I think there's a lot implied there. So the company's going to get in trouble if they just full on fire him. And I think there's a lot of issues with being on disability and then coming back. I think that they can't just fire him straight up either because of being on disability. So I think that they need to kind of set some goals with him and also see what they can do with his job description to make it a better fit for them and for him, and then see how it goes. But stick to, kind of start like a fresh start. And then stick to the 3 years. If he's not promoted in a certain amount of time, then he's got to go. So they need to stick to a timeline this time.
Okay, Lisa.
I think that they should have fired him 2 or 3 years ago, before his health issues began, but because they're in the middle of that, I think that ethically they shouldn't fire him. And so therefore I agree with Cindy that he should be put on some kind of an improvement plan, and try to make it work between him and the company, until he can get up to par, or maybe his health's going to get worse that he just can't work anymore. But either way, I feel like the company has an obligation now ethically to keep him on and just do the best they can.
Yeah, that is right. But particularly when you consider the fact that the other team members have been rallying around him all the while he was sick, and so just sending him off may have some psychological effect on them. Thank you. What are your thoughts on this, Sarah?
I I agree with Lisa and Cindy that it's going to be really hard legally to fire him at this point, because you have given him these mixed messages. You right after disability, I think it's going to be hard to fire him as well. It legally, I think it's just going to be a nightmare at this point. I really think that they need to look at doing the other responsibilities and changing his job description so he is a more productive member of the team, and work with him. Have the goals, have a plan, and make sure that you stick with the timeline that the company has in place with the policies. Because if you don't, it's going to come back, and again, it's going to really hurt you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Wendy.
I agree with everyone that he is a liability at this point, but he has been on disability. I think they should look at what his assets were and what his contributions were with the other company that they acquired, and see if there's a way that they can make those work, and present a plan to him and say, you know, let's work on getting you promoted or something like that. And if not, maybe, you know, discuss with him that, do you feel like you're contributing? You know, ask him, because if he doesn't feel like he's contributing, he might not be happy as it is. And, you know, just be open about him. You know, where do you see yourself at this company? What are your goals? You know, where would you like to be? And talk it through with him, and then make a plan and stick to that plan on. And if the goals aren't met and he doesn't see the improvement happening, then it might be time just to let him go. And he might be at the point thinking, you're right, it might be time to let me go. So.
Okay, thank you all so much. It's a very dicey situation for both Phil, Terry, and the company, because the decision they will make will likely affect either of them negatively or positively. And but either way, decision has to be made. Decision has to be made, and it's one key important thing that managers will have to do. So, what can we learn from this case about making decisions about termination? What can we learn from this case about
I think something we can
decision
learn is
making
making
or
sure you have
termination?
all
Yeah.
your ducks in a row, making sure you have the documentation, make sure that they know when they've done a good job or when they've done poorly. Something that I thought was really cool, she talked about, I told them when they were doing a good job, but I also told them don't expect a promotion every time they did a good job. You know, it is important. We read earlier a couple weeks ago, it is important to let your team members know when they're doing well, but it's also important to not lead them on from this week's reading. You know, you need to make sure that they know that they're doing a good job. You need to make sure that they know what they need to improve on, and you know what areas are not as good as they need to be. Just, I think the main point is really making sure that you're communicating well with everyone.
One thing that I think that I've learned from this, that HR is so important and policies are so important to follow. Is it Terry or Phil shouldn't have even been hired because he had no hires 5 across the way. And then that puts management in a sticky situation, because what are they supposed to do? Upper management wants them, you don't. So I think it's very important to stick with the policies, and you know, have a zero tolerance. You know, don't let exceptions through, because that puts the company in a sticky situation, and it puts the other employees in a sticky situation. And I really think that friendship should not enter business. So, because my husband's
right.
kind of in a situation like this, where it's a small company down in Salt Lake. They've only been around for about 5 years, and they hired a whole bunch of friends. And so my husband, who came in as an outsider, he doesn't know where he stands because he's not in that friend group. But he's a high performer. He's been promoted quickly. But now he's in a situation where he's level with somebody who is in that friend group, and he doesn't feel like he can really speak his mind and say, it's just a sticky situation. So I don't think you should hire friends.
Even if you're going to hire friends, you just have to be clear on the terms and conditions. That this is not a social gathering where we come to to play and have fun. This is where we're doing business. So if this happens, it goes. If this also happens, you're fired or you'll be kicked away or something. I think if that understanding is established from the beginning, everybody will know his or her limit, even if the sociality will still go on in the company. But if that is not explained, then every other friend would think, okay, I'm just going to that place, just like hanging out with my friends. And that is where negligence will come in, dereliction of duties, and several other problems.
I
So before
agree with
we
Wendy. I
close for
don't think
today's
friends.
meeting, okay.
I don't think hiring friends is a good idea. It was a few weeks back that they talked about you shouldn't hire somebody that you're not willing to fire. And obviously that was the problem with Terry here. They hired someone they were not willing to fire. I just think friends and
Yeah.
family, it gets nasty. It ruins relationships. And then, yeah, I think that now this poor manager is managing expectations. So I think it's, like Wendy was saying, HR is so important because if you don't follow policy, you're in all kinds of situations you don't want to be in.
Yeah, so before closing, here's the last question. Ask to think about what we have learned that could apply in a future situation. I think one thing that I have learned that could apply in future situation is to set clear the terms and conditions more explicitly. I mean, if this is going to happen, if as was said earlier on, policies are not just meant to occupy pages of books. They're meant to be implemented and to be followed thoroughly. So if the company has a policy that somebody stays on for 3 years, and if for any reason the person needs to continue, there should be some kind of renewal of that sort. So to let the person know that this is a second phase of this, but this part still stands. And if the policies are not implemented, it will lead to a lot of internal chaos. Lots of people want to do what they feel, and you find it hard to terminate anybody's contract because doing so will bring more heavier cost on the company.
I think something else we could look at for future is back to the documentation. A lot of this stems from not having proper documentation. We don't know if there was warnings. We don't know why Phil didn't get fired after the 3 years, even though he was supposed to. My husband, he calls me the queen of paperwork because I document, like if I call the insurance company, I write the date, the time, who I talked to, the phone company, like anyone I talk to. And it's not something that he does, but I was an administrative assistant for a life insurance agent that also sold stocks and did trading on Wall Street. And so I learned that I had to document everything because, as you can imagine, if you're a financial planner and somebody wants you to buy them a stock and you don't at the right time, the timing of that's critical. And so I learned to write down the date and time of everyone I talked to. But I think documentation in HR, especially like now where everything's gone to computers, I think we get a little lax with what we document and what we don't. And we have this mentality, well, it's on the computer, it's there forever, which to a degree it is if you can access it. But it's not always. And so I think that's something that we could look at for future cases is just documentation is critical.
Okay, just any more comment before we close for today? Today has been a very wonderful day. I am so glad I'm able to meet with you all today. I hope we all had a happy Thanksgiving weekend.
Yes, thank you. Good to finally meet with you too. We've missed you.
Yeah, I missed you too. So, any other thoughts? I think everything was covered, or did I miss any part?
Were we supposed to discuss the part 2 to the story?
Oh yeah, that's step 5. Gosh. Excuse me. Yeah,
Because there
that's
was a
right.
final
That's
decision. I read it already.
right. Okay. Okay, so just quickly tell us how did the manager do well, and what did she do that was effective and that wasn't effective?
Did everybody read the part 2 already?
I did.
Yeah.
I am so sorry that part escaped my eyes.
Oh,
It looks like everyone except for Sarah. I don't know. Alex, did you read it? So Sarah and Alex haven't read it.
I really thought her approach was great to it. When she sat, I get their names mixed up, Terry down and said, you know, do you really want to be a part of this team? You're not a superstar, and why would you want to be a part of a team that's you're not a superstar to? And I really thought that approach was great. He took it upon himself to either look for a different position in the company or to leave, and he left with a party. He didn't leave on a bad note, and he went and found something that was more along his lines. And I also think that I mean, Phil's story's kind of sad, but you know, they kind of kept his job there, but they had somebody else filling in for him when he wasn't gone or when he wasn't there. And when he came back, he kind of just did stuff, and then he eventually left too, and then also left the world. So I don't know. I think the way that she approached it, her openness and everything is great.
Yeah, I liked the way she handled Terry, especially where she just brought him in and was like, why is this fun for you? How is this fun for you? And then pointed out like how he would get fired. You know, if she put him on the PIP, that basically he would be escorted to his desk to take his stuff, and that would be, you know, sad for him, and how it would be better to leave on his own terms with a party. So I like the way she handled it. And then yeah, Phil's was just sad. I mean, it was nice that they kept him on and like kept working with it, but it was hard where she said that she had to manage his expectations. But ultimately he just transferred to a different team, which, you know, worked for him for the situation that he was in. But yeah, I think the way she handled Terry was really smart.
I think that's the last part. Once again, so sorry we missed that one. That it's an approach that I think worked very well at the end. They were able to get the both Terry and Phil off without creating any sad feeling kind of that will make the team to underperform, and everything came back in a very good way, and I'm glad she took that bold decision to, you know, like say taking the bull by the horn, approaching them to this is what must be done, and that style of management is very effective.
Yes, and I think that she did it in a very kind way too, which was, I think, as an employee, they very much appreciated.
Yeah, Lisa, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think sometimes managers don't think they can be kind, but they can do it in a kind way and a respectful way that really, like I think Terry, you know, he left on a happy note. Whereas if she would have approached it a different way, it could have been bad, and it could have been bad for her job since he had so many friends in upper management.
Uh-huh.
So who's leading next week?
Next week is Alex.
Okay.
And then the final week, I can't really tell that there's a discussion, but there's a discussion leader, so I'm not really sure I've looked at it a couple times, but I do know that the final is a pretty big writing thing for each of us. So just reminding that doohickeys is also due that week. So anything you can add this week to doohickeys for this information will be helpful, because we're going to have to submit our own pretty big writing finals along with doohickeys on that last week.
Okay, thank you very much for the information. So Alex, it's your turn next week.
Yep.
And is everyone good for the 10 o'clock on Wednesday?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm good.
Yep.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you very
next
much
week.
for the time.
Mhm.
Have a good week.
Bye.
You
Bye.